Hello and welcome to the Engineering Career Coach podcast. In this episode, I'll be talking to Sam Feller, a mechanical engineer and founder of Awkward Engineer, about how he turned a $500 initial investment into a five-figure annual passive income, and the things he does to manage his teams effectively. I'm your host, Jeff Perry, founder of More Than Engineering and creator of the Engineering Career Accelerator program, helping engineers and technology professionals with leadership and career coaching to create meaningful careers and lives. And this is the Engineering Career Coach podcast brought to you by EMI, the first podcast dedicated to helping engineers and technical professionals with both their personal and professional development. Let's jump right in. Now it's time to jump into the main segment of the episode. Today I have the pleasure to have with me Sam Feller, founder of Awkward Engineer. Sam, welcome to the Engineering Career Coach podcast.
Thank you. It is exciting to be here.
Yeah, so really excited to have you. And so I'd love to have you introduce yourself in your own words, tell our listeners a little bit more about you, what life looks like on a daily basis. What are some of the things you're working on these days?
So I've had a really zigzaggy career. Started as a mechanical engineer. I went to private industry for a while. I started a company as a founder at a company that made solar-powered cell phone charging kiosks. I freelanced for a while. I ended up as a program manager at Amazon. Tried more things after that. Ended up as a product manager, and now I do some consulting, helping growing teams learn how to effectively run their projects. So if that wasn't zigzaggy, I don't know what is.
Totally. And tell us a little bit more about Awkward Engineer and what this is and what was kind of the start of that.
Yeah, so Awkward Engineer started a long time ago. So it's awkwardengineer.com. And I was working as a mechanical engineer at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. So doing all sorts of like aerospace defense things. And I had a bunch of ideas around like how to run satellite programs. I don't know, some of the tools we used. And I talked to somebody about it, and he was like, "What do you really want to do, Sam?" And I just had this silly idea where I liked pressing red buttons. And I thought it would be fun to have like an e-stop button as my light switch in my bedroom. And I was like, well, if I like this idea, I wonder who else would like this idea. And so I sold it. Like I think I sold, well, I tried selling a few online, and I think I sold three. So there's my mom, my dad, and a stranger on the internet. And I still had like a whole bunch of these things in stock. And I was like, well, I'm not giving up yet. And so I like walked down the street to sell stuff. And I eventually I closed a deal with thinkgeek.com, and they bought a whole bunch of these panic button light switch kits. And like I made some real money doing it. And I was like, you know what, this was fun. And so I got into like all sorts of other like product development things. Like I've always liked making stuff. So it was a good avenue for making stuff. And that was really kind of where Awkward Engineer went. And since then it's always been a creative outlet for things that I've wanted to make. And these days it's really more of a blog. I write about all sorts of things. But yeah, I don't know. It's been fun, and it's a thing that I like to keep. And I've actually gotten job interviews from the awkwardengineer.com email address. So I'm definitely hanging on to the URL.
Nice. Well, that's good. It's got some history, so that's great. So, Sam, where did this come from? Like, obviously, as a mechanical engineer, like we're building, designing stuff. But where did your passion start for like just making stuff? And aside from red buttons, what are some of the other things that you've made over the years that you would enjoyed?
Yeah, I mean, like as a kid, I played with Legos a lot. I don't know if you get that from other engineers that you talk
Hmm.
to. I don't know if that's a sign. Uh, I went to a science and tech high school.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, it's Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. So it's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But it's outside, is in the DC area, so in Fairfax County. And I had like I suppose we could have called it shop, but it was a fancy science and tech class or science and tech school. So they called it the prototyping lab. And
Sure.
I really enjoyed making stuff. And so I think that's why I went to to college for mechanical engineering, because like the output of your work was always something physical and tangible. But since then, I think my interests have kind of like grown and broadened to not just physical things, but also like software as well, and also like designing like organizations and how people work together.
Hmm. Okay, very good. Yeah, it's interesting as I think about, I also did mechanical engineering as a degree, but I didn't connect, at least earlier on. I knew mechanical engineering, like we were creating physical things, but I didn't connect early on just how much like the tinkering and the making stuff was a part of that. As early, it was more like, hey, I was good at math and science and stuff. People were like, oh yeah, engineering's a thing to do. Mechanical engineering was sort of this really broad potential of where you could take your career. And so it made sense. And some of the cool things in automotive or aerospace and some of the things, were potential ways to take it from there. But would have loved those opportunities earlier, like you got it, like you had a prototyping lab or a
Yeah.
shop to make some things and really engage in not just the theory of what engineering is, but what it comes down to is we're trying to create things
Yeah.
that do stuff. Sometimes it solves big problems and sometimes they're just fun, like a big red button for a light switch. But
Yeah. Yeah.
either way, you're either solving a problem or putting a smile on someone's face, hopefully, when
That's
you're
right.
making stuff. So, um, I want to. So we talked a little bit about the red button thing, but like, when this became a thing, like, how did it lead to you, like, from I enjoy pressing red buttons to
Hmm.
maybe I want to create these and start a business and sell these? Like, where did that idea come from? Hey, this is just a thing that would be kind of fun, to I'm actually turning this into something.
Uh, Maybe it came from a lot of like desire to take control of my own destiny. You know,
Okay.
I remember reading some books that were like influential on me when I was younger, and I don't know how much those books matter to me now, but maybe it set me off on the path that I did. So I had read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I don't know
Hmm.
if you ever knew that, if you
Yeah.
ever knew that book.
Robert
And he
Kiyosaki, right?
That's right. And he talked about like the thing that it stuck with me was he talked about like being stuck in a job. And if you ever get fired from that job, like you're not accruing assets, you're at the mercy of someone else. And if you can start building like some sort of revenue generating thing and make money while you sleep, then that gives you like freedom and independence. And I think for him in Rich Dad Poor Dad, he pursued a real estate industry, which I just didn't have interest in.
Sure.
Uh, I also think that around that time, shortly after I read that book, like the 2008 housing bubble popped. So maybe that also soured me on the real estate industry. But he did talk about being able to make like IP, like make intellectual property and leverage it. And so I'd liked making stuff, and like making stuff that made other people happy was, or made other people laugh, was also like fun. And so that, I think that led a bit to like wanting to make stuff. And then when someone pays you for something that you make, like it's a really rewarding feeling. And so at the same time, like I was at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, and just career wise, uh, I'd been there for several years, didn't understand the path to promotion, was frustrated with my boss, and I was had interviewed at like other places, and it was this weird thing where I was like out of school for about 4 years, and I get all sorts of like interview feedback. They'd be like, well, you don't have these skills, and so we don't want to pay you like this much to do this thing. And it was really frustrating for me to hear. Like I'd done all sorts of design work in like machined aluminum parts. Like I could do all sort I could talk to you like up and down about like what goes into it, and like fixturing and holding and like datum surfaces and references and all sorts of stuff
Mhm.
like that. But I'd never designed an injection molded part before. Not that I couldn't, like, but they didn't want to pay for me to learn.
Yeah.
I don't know. And so I was like, well, I can take control of my own destiny here, and I'll just make my own injection molded part. And so I had, I mean, that was another one of the awkward engineer products was I had this thing called a cookie dunk cup, which was pretty silly. It was the idea that you could like dunk an Oreo in a cup of milk, and it had a special shape so that if your hand, oh, we're on video, not just a podcast. So
Yeah.
if your hands couldn't reach all the way into the bottom of the cup, like you drink some milk and now the milk level is too low, so it had this like groove at the bottom that the cookie would fit into. So even if you had like half an ounce of milk left, you could still get a good dunk. So I used that as like a Kickstarter, and I like went out and I talked to injection molding shops. I did the CAD modeling on it. I built prototypes. I tested the prototypes. Uh, Learned about like tooling and tooling costs, like all this stuff. And then turns out the Kickstarter campaign failed, which is fine. I still learned a whole bunch from it.
Hmm.
But someone saw my Kickstarter, and they had this cracks me up that they had a competing like cookie dunk product on the market, and he ended up licensing the cookie idea, like the cookie dunk cup, for me, which was fantastic. And so I ended up being able to say like, yes, I have designed an injection molded part. This is what I learned from the experience, and so it,
Hmm.
it held value in like future interviews.
Very cool. There you go. So it wasn't just like, hey, I want to create this asset in terms of revenue, but an asset in terms of an experience and a project that you went through to learn things that you
Yeah,
wanted to learn instead of just
most
hoping that you got a project at work that would teach you
yeah,
that, right?
yeah. So a lot of my projects were like I've just ended up in weird places in my career. So
Hmm.
the consulting firm was where I or the we're a contracting firm. We did engineering work for hire and
Hmm.
specialized mostly in like usually regulated systems. So they would do like aircraft fuel pumps, med devices, and the company started out focusing almost entirely in software. So they do like regulated software, and they wanted to grow to offer full systems, so like electromechanical builds in addition to the software. And I was there for 3 years, and I was only billable to clients 15% of the time, which is wild. Like there are a lot of reasons why. Like they're hiring firing freezes because the company was acquired in the middle of it. Like they were trying to build out this new like function. So it made sense that they didn't have like all the work. They were building, they needed to have like heads on board and show expertise so they could bid on future products. So it was again like a strange career experience, and I didn't have all the like skills that I necessarily should have. And so one of my awkward engineer products is my second Kickstarter campaign was this thing called the analog voltmeter clock. And I had never done a sheet metal part before. And so I designed it, and there's a lot more to it. I was totally obsessed with like small batch American based manufacturing. So it was designed to be a sheet metal product that could be made profitably in low volumes. But I also got into like circuit board development. I got into embedded firmware. It led to wanting to learn more about industrial design and graphic design because I wanted this voltmeter clock to look good. My previous Kickstarter campaign had failed, so I wanted to learn more as part of this campaign. So like I suppose the project based, like I want to build this, like became a good impetus for learning a whole bunch of other things. Like people talk about STEM all the time. It might even be on my LinkedIn profile. I'm not sure if I still have it anymore, but like STEM is like science, technology, like engineering and math. And
Hmm.
like and some people started using STEAM, like
Yeah.
science, technology, engineering, art, and math.
Right.
Like that the art is the core why that provided the motivation for all of that. Like if you just
Yeah.
said like I want to learn about sheet metal, like okay, but like I wanted to make this cool little like retro clock thing. Like
Yeah.
that's why I did it. That gave me the drive to like push all the way through to actually make it.
Yeah, it's cool. Actually, I mean, my oldest daughter's in second grade, and so they call it STEAM class. It's not STEM. They use STEAM
Yeah.
in school to integrate the art idea with the other STEM topics, which I think is cool to do that earlier rather than later, which is great. Okay, so I mean, you sounds like you did a bunch of different projects here. I'm curious for those who maybe have an idea of something that they're thinking about working on or trying out as a project, something they want to build, something they want to try out, a skill they want to develop. What are some of the things that worked really well for you when you were saying, hey, I want to learn this, but I have to manage the learning of this experience. I need to manage the project and I need to find suppliers for these things and all this stuff. What are some of the things that really worked well for you to kind of be this one person show, but manage a pretty complex project that maybe you hadn't built something like that before?
Uh, I don't know. I guess there's no substitute for learning by doing,
Sure.
and then not being afraid to just say, well, let's do the next thing. You don't have to eat the whole elephant all at once. And then, from my time at that like contracting firm, like they did a lot of systems engineering. And I think that gave me a good mindset for a lot of these problems. Like when you're doing a med device, there's this thing associated with it called the design history file. And so, which is the design history file is usually shows like some sort of evidence that you designed things on purpose for reasons. And
Okay.
and there were like all sorts of other artifacts that might become part of it. It's been a long time since I've done med device stuff, so I don't remember like all the artifacts that you generate along the way.
Sure.
But they would take this like systems mentality, and so they'd be like, well, we know like this is the larger systems decomposition, but at each level of the system, we know that we're going to have to show that like we designed it on purpose, that we were able to build it, that we were able to test it, and those all those things exist at each level of the system. And then they would like they were big about how they could like they would organize their document files to support this as well so that you could get through your FDA audits like really quickly. But
Okay.
that sort of systems mentality of like we're breaking this down into pieces, and in each
Mhm.
like piece of the system we're going to have certain like amounts of work that we're going to need to do to demonstrate that we can do things. Like I suppose I've I've always thought what I was taught back then, and I still carry to this day, is you're looking for like binary things that are done or not. And so when you start looking for like things and looking for deliverables, you get caught up less in the work that you're trying to do, and you sort of keep your eyes a little bit more on the prize. Like so
Mm.
the goal, with the sheet metal, I guess, was to get to a sheet metal design that could be like assembled and integrated. Like how to design it, like where to design it. I don't know. Like the CAD package didn't matter as much. At the end of the day, you could say, do I have a sheet metal design that I can like take to a vendor to quote? Like that's the thing that I need. And when you keep your eye on the prize like that, I think you get less caught up in some of the minutia and the details of what might like waylay you. And
Yeah.
then I think it also helps to say like other people have done sheet metal before or learned how to design sheet metal. Like clearly this is possible. And so that would also help.
Yeah, that's good. And so trying to get to that, what is the definition of done idea for not just the whole project, but the different steps along the way and
Yeah.
focusing on that instead of, every little tiny detail. Because yeah, engineers and anyone really can find themselves being caught up in things that don't really matter to the success of what you're trying to get to in the end. So
Yeah.
it's great. Okay, so let's shift gears here a little bit, Sam. So you're mentioning like over the years, you've also gotten interested beyond making things. You got interested in software, you got interested in teams and how do we manage teams effectively and form teams and stuff like that. I'm curious because we have a lot of people who are in teams or leading teams who are listeners to the podcast. What are some of the things that are important to you as you think about managing a team, especially in maybe our hybrid remote world that we're in now, that you're seeing work really well, both from the the management or leadership side, but also
Hmm.
from how we form teams with the right people? Like, what are those principles that are really important to you that you've seen to be effective?
Uh, oh man. So
Big topic, but
yeah, yeah. No,
where
no, it's
would you
good.
start?
Like so I was a program manager at Amazon, which on some pretty intense like large scale programs that had to push me like, and I developed like a different mentality around like leading larger groups of people and building systems to do that.
Hmm.
So I think that some of the like hiring people, forming teams, like I don't think I can speak as articulately about that, but running
Okay,
running larger projects, I'm happy to share, I guess,
let's talk about
what I
it.
learned. So I was working on this program called the Dash Cart, which was this like cloud connected machine vision enabled shopping cart that would just allow you to drop items into the basket. And as soon as you dropped it in, the machine vision algorithms would identify what it was. So it was a pretty cool experience. This was a Skunkworks team, and it
Hmm.
like a sidebar like I count myself as pretty lucky to have been at a Skunkworks at one of the largest companies in the US or in the world really. And
Right.
we basically like as a hardware engineer or being like a program manager for a hardware program, like we were given essentially like infinite budget. Like it
Yeah.
was effectively infinite money and we could just go fast and it
Yeah.
was
And
awesome.
Sam, continue on that side note, just in case any of our listeners aren't familiar with what Skunkworks means. Can
Ah,
you share what that is?
yeah, so Skunkworks is named after a group at Lockheed that invented like they invented all the coolest airplanes. So the SR-71 Blackbird, the
Yep.
F-117 stealth fighter, the U-2 spy plane. I don't know if I missed any in there, but they were known for being this like small elite group of engineers who also moved tremendously quickly. And
Hmm.
not only did they move tremendously quickly, the things that they built and delivered were game changing. So
Yeah.
I think typical development timelines for fighter jet, I think are like on the order of 10 years. And they developed the F-117 stealth bomber, which was like stealth technology. So it's game changing technology as well. And I think their development cycle was like 24 months,
Yeah.
if not faster. So that's skunk works are about like small groups of talented people that make cool things.
Yeah. And do it and eliminating a ton of the bureaucracy that would
Yeah,
normally be there and saying you have all the resources you need to just
that's right.
do and accomplish what you need to do, which is cool.
That's right.
Anyway, so
So
you were in a part of a team that was designed like that, but
mhm,
within Amazon doing some hardware stuff on this
that's right.
project.
That's right. So the program, I think there were around 30 people that I was working with across disciplines. So I was the hardware program manager and I was working with electrical, mechanical, firmware, optics, industrial design, supply chain, operations, like the works, and
Hmm.
often working with the machine vision folks, like usually as a liaison, but sometimes doing more work with them. And so it was a real like growth experience for me. So as as an individual, like running my own Kickstarters, I was able to take projects end to end and have sort of that drive to finish and look for deliverables. And I hadn't learned how to like scale or lead a team that large yet. And so one day someone said something to me. They're like, Sam, you're really cross-disciplinary and you run around and you talk to everybody, which is awesome, but you need to stop running around and talking to everybody. You need to build a system so that information flows to you. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll think about that. And then I was talking to another program manager who is a mentor of mine and asking him about like his process and his flow. And he was like, I insist that everyone distills information for me and I ask about like what do I get and when do I get it? And it was those two things like that clicked together. Like I need a system so that information flows towards me and I need to ask the information that I need is what do I get and when do I get it? And so I started thinking about like, what are the habits of this team? Like, what are they already doing today? What are the things that I can like piggyback off of and leverage so that when I build a system, like the system is designed for the engineers that I work with. And then what do I get? When do I get it? Is pretty simple. It turns into a few more questions like what am I supposed to get? When am I supposed to get it? Like if it's not going to happen, then why? Like how did that happen? And then what are you doing about it? Like what are you doing next? And do you need anything from me? And it turns out you can answer those questions in about like, I don't know, two tweets, like 280 characters or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I started leveraging like for that team, they loved using this document software we had called Quip. They used it like every day, all day. And so I started building out like workflows and schedules and things to answer like what do I get, when do I get it in Quip, and they started using it. And I hadn't learned all of, like the design processes yet to get people to really adopt it. Like I started believing in status meetings. And so I transferred from that Skunkworks team to another team at Amazon. It was in Alexa, and I was working with a whole bunch of software teams. So I think I said at the beginning, very zigzaggy. So at this point, I'm a
Sure.
program manager for software, and they were using Jira, which is like a software. I mean, you can use it for other things, but it's a project management tool.
Mhm.
And like they were in Jira all day, every day, moving tickets along. And so I was able to get them to organize things and leverage what they were already doing to build a system so that they would summarize at a high level, like what do I get and when do I get it? And so I had three teams working on disparate things, like completely different ends of the stack. There was a infrastructure engineering team. There was like a natural language processing team. There was a recommendation team, like completely different things. Like my mind was exploding. And so I built the system on top of Jira that just said, like, what do I get? When do I get it? And to make sure people actually did it, I just like implemented a little status meeting. And it turns out like you could write your status update in all of like 2 minutes. And so in the first 2 minutes of the meeting, like I would tell people to write their updates ahead of time. But you could tell like people would be typing away, writing their updates. And then we would just do a status read and it would take 15 minutes. And so like it's 15 minutes once a week, gave a really high level summary, and like the engineers totally bought into it. And so I like really learned how to build this system so that information flowed to me. And so I stopped wasting my time like hounding people for status updates and then started spending more time on like strategic things. And so
Okay.
that's my that's my like how do I run that's my like advice on running teams, or what I learned about working with engineers and larger groups of people.
That's great. I love it. And thanks for the context of the story. So now, as you're also working with engineers and teams, there's getting the statuses, but we're also trying to coach and help people grow. And maybe there's changes or people aren't performing as well as we would like them to and stuff. So talk to us about the importance on your mind of like those moments and opportunities where you had to give feedback
Mm,
and how you think about creating safe spaces when you
yeah.
are doing that so that people are ready to receive that and you can really move the needle instead of getting people on the defensive side when those feedback moments come.
So giving feedback can be really hard and really awkward, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And the more you practice it, like the more often you can give small pieces of feedback, like the easier it becomes. Uh, One of the best books for that, I think, was 1 Minute Manager. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
read that one, but I'd recommend that. And
Yeah, I've
then,
heard of it, but I haven't read that one.
yeah, it talks about like making clear goals, like giving feedback, like catch people doing something right, like which is kind of that reinforcing feedback, and also like it's obvious if someone's doing something wrong, you need to correct it. And so that book helped like adjust my mindset on like how to get like good feedback to people and why it's so important. Uh, Radical Candor is another book that I would recommend. It talks a lot more about feedback, but 1 Minute Manager is just so much shorter and easier to digest.
Yeah.
And so I feel like maybe I have like one like insight like thing that I've brought to the world. Uh, so when I transferred off of the Skunkworks team, they were like, "Sam, you're a rock star. We'd hate to lose you. What can we do to get you to stay?" And I was like, "Well, that's a heck of a time to be telling me that. Like I'm leaving the team now." And similar thing when I left Alexa. They're like, "Well, we'd hate to lose you. Is there anything we can do to get you to stay?" And I was like, "That's the wrong time to be asking me that question." And so I think a lot of the feedback, like none of the books talked about this, was how important it is to tell people like the positive feedback, just where they stand and how you think of them. Like, and sort of the analogy that I use is that like I'm married and I tell my wife all the time that I love her. It would be really weird for her to be like, "Well, I'm divorcing you, Sam." And I'd be like, "That's the wrong time to say, but I love you." And she'd be like, "Well, why wouldn't you tell me that before?" Like it that's not how relationships work. And I think like employment relations are, they're not the same as personal relations, but they're analogies.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really important to tell people that you enjoy working with them. Or I think it's also okay to say, like, you know what, you're in the wrong seat. Like, you don't really fit here. I don't think you're doing that great a job. Like, I don't need to fire you, but you should know that. Maybe you should think about looking for another job. And, maybe we can also talk about like what's going better. And the story that I tell, like that woman that I work with, and I'll I'll leave her name out, but I was like, "Hey, I really enjoy working with you. I want to keep you. I want you to like stay on this team. Like this has, been really good." And in that moment, she said, "This might be a good time to tell you that I'm pregnant." And I was like, "Oh." And so by me taking the initiative and saying like, and not waiting until like the day she was quitting to say, "But I really like you. I want to keep you." Like that, by taking the initiative to tell people where they stand, it really creates this like environment of culture, or this environment of trust. Like, and so like when I said, "I like you, I want to keep you. If there's anything else you want to do," and she said like, "Well, I'm pregnant." Like it made a safe space for her to share that she was pregnant, but also like she had the confidence that like I just told her that I wanted to keep her. Like,
Mhm.
and so she came back from her pregnancy, and I'm still like I still work with her. So that is my like how to give feedback. Just maybe it's different from like the coaching or like feedback in the moment, but it's at like a higher level. I think it's really important to tell people like where they stand.
No, I love it, and it's great, and some interesting analogies there with personal relationships and things that I can relate. Is um, I'm married as well, and so yeah, that would be weird if I didn't share with my
Yeah.
wife. But same thing with employees. I do see that so many of those conversations and that's with telling people where they stand, but also like sometimes I feel like the idea of getting exit interviews and stuff as people are leaving, sometimes the
It's the
time for
wrong
having those
time.
conversations
It's too late.
to fix it is it's too late. And
Yeah,
so and rarely do we do something with that. Like we should be able to create environments for those things, to have those conversations for what needs to improve sooner rather than getting to, those tough places. So
that's right.
yeah, no, it's great. Well, this has been a fun conversation. We've talked about all sorts of different things, Sam. At this point, we're going to transition to the Take Action Today segment of the show. We'll get
All
one
right.
more final piece of actionable advice. We'll be right back. Now it's time for our Take Action Today segment of the show. Sam, we've had a fun conversation. We've talked about growing side businesses. We've talked about managing and leadership and things. Let's just as we were ending off, we were talking a lot about this leadership topic of how we build these safe places and have some of these conversations. What would you say to those who are listeners who are leaders now or aspiring leaders or just have influence? What would you say to them as far as a final takeaway that they can do today, this week, to build and help their teams?
I think, especially for engineering leaders, but I think, for your peers as well. I think if you haven't told the people around you how you feel about them, and I hope it's positive, that you enjoy working with them and that you want to help them and keep them. Like, why wait? You tell them today. And I think the reaction that people will get from telling their staff or their team, like, hey, you've been doing a good job. I really enjoy working with you. Like providing specifics about the work they do, also important. And saying like, I want to help you and keep you. Is there anything I can do? I think is just the easiest thing to like keep and retain people and just provide for like better working relationships. And I think it's just the right thing to do to take care of each other as people. And that is my take action recommendation.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much for that, Sam. And I really appreciate our conversation. If people are interested in learning more about you, connecting and learning more about Awkward Engineer or any of the other things that you have or have done, where would you point them?
Awkwardengineer.com, and contact information is there.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, and hope we stay connected and wish you nothing but continued success. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed the episode today. We would love to hear your feedback, comments, and questions. You can go to www.engineeringmanagementinstitute.org, where you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in the episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books that we mentioned. And don't forget to check out any upcoming live webinars, also at engineeringmanagementinstitute.org. Additionally, for any engineers who are struggling and need help taking the next career step, I've created some free training resources with an opportunity to join a more intensive program called the Engineering Career Accelerator. You can find more information at engineeringcareeraccelerator.com. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering endeavors.